And we don't have a quorum? Ah, we have a quorum, but no one has signed up to talk, which can be remedied. We have two people in the audience, including Alderman Fisk, who I have just learned is the hardest working alderman.
Yes.
And
we have to find explanation.
And on our agenda, we have bed and breakfast, which is continued from the last meeting. Since the last meeting, Alderman Fisk has shared with staff additional comments regarding bed and breakfast. And if you have anything else, probably that's a good way to start.
Okay, should I come over to?
Yes, please. I think we're recording the session, so.
Alderman Nguyen is going to try to be here tonight. She may not make it, but we'll see. I've had a double meltdown of computers, so I'm going to try to do my best to recreate what. You should have received a letter from Holly and David Reynolds. I just want to confirm that you've received that communication. And
We have one more coming.
You know, there's something else that's attached. No, I know. About 900 feet, which
I think it was 1,500 feet that was being recommended that would conform with the group homes.
900 feet.
1,500 feet. Should be similar to what is in the zoning ordinance for group homes. It's not? Again, I'm sorry, I'm
I think there's a
computerless.
mistake. I think it's 900 feet, but David Reynolds' letter talks about 1,500 feet, but the zoning ordinance talks about 900 feet, I think.
Okay.
And there was a memo circulated that referred to 900 feet, right?
Yeah, the Craig Sklonar, our general planner, the requirement, we don't have an actual definition for group home, but the definition that it found was in section 6444 of the zoning ordinance, requiring residential care homes in residential districts to be spaced no less than 900 feet from each other.
Okay. Okay. And that would mean roughly one per block. I mean, if we're thinking of 50-foot wide lot.
Residential blocks are about 600 feet in the city. So you're talking about one every 1.5 blocks.
Okay. Okay. So again, bear with me. I feel like I have half of my brain missing without my computer, but I will try to do the best I can. Well, I have this, but it doesn't have, I mean, this is nice and pretty, but it doesn't have my information on it. But thank you, Seth. That was a nice offer. No, I do have something here that's only so I can hold on to it and feel like I've got some stability. So what we were looking at was a better definition of ownership. I think, and that's the most important thing, actually. And that definition of ownership, one of the suggestions that we had was that it should be no less than 50% ownership of the real property, and preferably 100% ownership of the real property, but definitely not 1%. I mean, so we really do have a real live-in owner. So that was the first thing. The second thing was the number of bedrooms that should be allowed in a bed and breakfast. Our recommendation was that it should be 2, or you might choose to do a percentage. I mean, some of these houses have, are large and have 6 or 7 bedrooms in them. Our recommendation is that you limit it to 2 bedrooms or 30% of the number of bedrooms in a house. Obviously, no kitchen facilities or dwelling units in basements. I'm going to ask anyone in the audience who can remind me of what I said in my email. Lynn, you might. Yeah, if there was a question about parking, whether the parking provisions were adequate, and they may be. It may be that we don't need to touch parking at all. And Greg, do you have my email? Fabulous. Okay, great. Oh, thank you. Okay. Requiring a license and inspection, so licensing of beds and breakfasts. And I think that's it. I think I managed to cover them. So limiting the number of bedrooms to 2 or no more than 30%, requiring a minimum distance between Bs and Bs to make them conform with group care or residential care homes, so 900 feet. Clarifying the definition of ownership, requiring licensing, and prohibiting basement apartments or rental units in conjunction with a B&B. And then just looking at off-street parking requirements, which may be fine. So that's the gist of what we would like to address.
Let me ask a question about the 30%. It essentially means you don't get to a third bedroom unless you have 10.
Right, and some of these houses are large and have lots of bedrooms.
We have 10 bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Are we having comments or questions?
Yes, this
Okay.
would be a good time.
Yeah, I put my light on a few minutes ago. Yeah, I too have an issue with the 2-bedroom limit or the 30%. I just, it seems to me that if people are going into opening a B&B or having a B&B, 2 bedrooms is not a very profitable, I don't know the economics, but it seems to me that might be not a very profitable proposition. And is this actually to stop somebody from opening them?
Well,
I'm getting people laughing here, so.
No, can I comment on that?
Sure, of course you can. I mean, but these, so those are my comments in the question when I read that in your
Sure.
in the attachment.
I think, we're trying to go back to what the original intent was when the zoning ordinance, initially provided for Bs and Bs, and it was to provide a couple of dwelling units in a house that would offset some of the costs that a family might have when they were, if their kids were gone and in college. And I think when you cross the line between 2 bedrooms and more than 2 bedrooms, you really get into the area of what is a B&B and what is actually a guest hotel. And I think that is something that our zoning ordinance doesn't provide for, that I think it needs to. I think we need to have that discussion of what a guest hotel is. And I see more than 2 bedrooms as that. We want to make sure that a B&B really does provide for a family to live in the house and have bedrooms to rent out. So 2 bedrooms in a house that are rented out or used exclusively for B&B purposes would mean that there would probably be at least 2, if not 3 other bedrooms that are used for family purposes in the house. And anything that isn't, that again is above that, would fall into the category of what would most likely be a guest hotel.
Now,
I mean, we're seeing in the situation with 300 Church Street, which has already passed City Council, and that's fine. But we're looking at a house that I think had 5 bedrooms in it, and all 5 are going to be used for the B&B.
I understand the issue of not wanting every single bedroom as a B&B, but if you have a 5-bedroom house, then you can't get to the 2 bedrooms. And if you have an empty house and you want to offset costs, as you had just talked about, it doesn't seem unreasonable to have 2, but that wouldn't be 30%. That would be over 30%, wouldn't it?
Well, and that's why the recommendation was for 2 bedrooms, and then or 30%.
I think it's whichever is most.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, whichever is most.
I didn't read it like that, but I mean, okay.
Okay, I have a comment, if I may.
Sure.
A B&B seems like it's kind of a hybrid. It's residential and it's business. And my question is there any business defined in our zoning code which specifies sole proprietorship versus corporation or more than two people owning it? And if not, are we running into a situation where we might wind up having somebody say we're discriminating against corporations in this particular area?
I can tell you that in Madison, Wisconsin, their zoning ordinance that they have amended does define ownership, I believe, at 50% of the ownership in the real property.
Okay, well, that brings up something that's also pretty interesting. A corporation can have two sets of stocks. One is ownership stock, and the other is distribution of income, where somebody can be deeded or given 51% of the ownership stock, which may satisfy your original requirement, but only given 2% of the voting stock for distribution of income. In effect, the corporation, if there is one, is getting the benefit. Is that right, Stu?
I don't know the answer to that question. That may very well. You can structure corporations a lot of different ways, and that
I've
may
seen that
very well
happen.
be one of them.
Yeah, I've seen that happen, and I don't want to undermine what we're trying to do, and that's something that we may want to look into. The other comment is this thing about density in rooms. You could specify the number of days out of the year that the rooms are occupied, and surely if you found that you had two bedrooms but they were occupied 80% of the time, then that might fall into the definition of a boutique hotel. That's another possible option. I like the idea of distance. I think that limits it. But if we're concerned about corporations coming in, they want a return on their investment, and they're pretty fickle about the time involved. And if they're going to put $1 million or $1.5 million into a home and renovating it, I'm not sure one or two bedrooms would ever give them the income. So I'm just questioning whether our concern is going to be greater than perhaps what the reality might ever turn out to be.
I think those are really good points, and and that was one of the things that, as a council, we were struggling with the LLC type of partnership in this, and ZBA was also struggling with that. So I don't know whether you've reviewed the ZBA discussion on 300 Church, but they were clearly focused on the fact that what happened at 300 Church was not at all what was intended under the zoning ordinance, and how you correct that. And I think I haven't done research. I probably will have to ask Craig to do that on what other communities have done to define ownership. But clearly, we didn't define that ownership. I mean, this is the first. 300 Church is the first application for a B&B, a licensed B&B that we've ever had in Evanston. Some have existed informally, but not officially. So now that we have this experience under our belt, we can see the broader picture. And the concern I think that neighbors have is that when you move a commercial, which is basically a commercial use, into a residential neighborhood, then what happens to the neighborhood? And that's what we're trying to figure out tonight is do we deal with ownership? Other communities have, and we probably should look at what they've done and ask our law department about that. Distance, obviously, means that there's not going to be a preponderance of Bs on one particular block, as was originally intended for this particular block. There was going to be two of them, just with one house in between. So that was a concern. And then licensing, also, if you have someone renting out 2 bedrooms, do you, on an occasional basis, like for Northwestern football games, do you need to be licensed? Do you need to be inspected? That's another question. Obviously, as a boutique hotel, you would be. All sorts of other regulations would come into come into place. And obviously, we don't want basement apartments rented out or to have caretakers living in basement apartments and operating Bs&Bs. So the impact on the neighborhood could be significant even from, a mom and pop run B&B if it is occupied, for a majority part of the year. So I think that's what we're having is the discussion that if we knew more back in 1993, we could have been discussing, but because we didn't have an application, it's falling to us right now to better define this. So.
All the lights are on for people on my right.
I've stayed at many B&Bs over my time, and I was always under the impression that the people that were hosting me were the owners of the structure. So it raises when we started to talk about corporations, I had to do a little thinking here, and I suspect that it may benefit owners, even if they are owners, residents of the original house, because they're opening it up for other people to use. It may behoove them to form an LLC just for liability purposes. So, okay, I can understand that. I can understand it from perhaps an integrity standpoint and a buy-in standpoint of having the interests of the neighborhood at heart. You would not want a B&B to be owned and operated by someone who didn't live in it, because then they lose their neighborly, shall we say, status amongst their fellow single-family residents. So I think that needs to be a stipulation. I'm somewhat sympathetic with Seth's comments as to limiting the number of bedrooms. It would seem to me that we would want these to be successful. We certainly want them to be inspected like any other business that accommodates members of the public, and serves them food and provides them overnight stay, which would mean fire department, health department, I presume. But it seems to me the most, in the B&Bs that I've stayed in across the country, the element that has the most impact on the neighborhood, as far as I could see, was parking and how that's handled. And I'm a little confused under the 647F guest parking description as to what that is stipulating. It would seem to me that we would not want guests in a B&B parking on the street if in any way it usurped the ability of neighbors to have spots that they've grown accustomed to. Then that means this house would have to have an alley or aprons in the back off the alley to accommodate their guests. And to my mind, that, more than anything else, would probably limit the number of bedrooms that could be turned into a B&B function. If you only have parking for three cars that doesn't take up spots on the street or block an alley, then you can have up to 3 units.
Well, in the case of 300 Church, there was an offer made to do valet parking, and no, because the house is going to be used for special events, and again, I mean the character of these really changes, and I think that's, as I think about it, again comes back to the number of bedrooms, because when you have devoted all of the rooms in your house to serve the B&B purpose, it's more likely that you're going to be operating it for special events every weekend. ZBA was very concerned about being able to make a profit and how often a house would have to be used in order to make the profit. And there, you're really heading into the boutique hotel. I mean, that's.
But not if you do what I was recommending, that parking has to be on site. And if someone wants to petition, say under a special use, to have valet parking, well then, it seems to me that would be an absolute special use.
Well,
because-
Bs and Bs are special uses and all.
But I mean, it'd be a special use on a special use. I don't,
Well, it would be a condition of the special use, probably, to do, again, valet parking, because that's what was provided for. But, I mean, the impact of something like this, depending on, again, I think it's tied to the number of bedrooms, can be huge. And, I mean, we'll learn more as 300 Church, becomes active, and that will probably take a couple of years. We'll learn more about that, but we clearly see some problems inherent in this, and I mean, I'm struggling like the rest of you.
well, I'm curious, how many parking spots does 300 Church have on their site
I think
for guests?
I think they have, it's not many. It's not, they have 3 spaces. Yeah, they have 3 spaces in the coach house, and they've rented a space in a house, in a garage of a house next door.
So is the coach house no longer going to be used for a tenant?
The tenant has, because it's restricted parking, the tenant of the coach house is a resident, so can get a residence-only permit. So the tenant of the coach house will park on the street, and the owners of the house, whoever they are, will be parking on the street as well. So you're taking all of the parking spaces that are off the street, and you're devoting them, in this particular case, to the people who will be at the B&B.
Well, can I ask for clarification on paragraph F, guest parking? Guest parking may be provided either on site, which I understand, in the rear off a public alley, which I understand, or along the curb abutting the lot, but at no time shall guest parking be permitted in any front or side yard.
I think that's as long as the parking on the street is not restricted. And in most of these neighborhoods, frankly, there is restricted parking. Can't park in your front yard.
We could draft an ordinance that on-site parking is on-site parking. It can be done. And then I would not have thought of the loophole of taking the residents and putting their cars on the street, but now we can think about that, make on-site parking. You had some comments.
I just wanted to understand the procedure to draft this ordinance before we got too far ahead into it, because it seems that we're basically given the ordinance and we just have to draft it, I'm a bit taken aback by the discussion of what the intent of the ordinance was in 1993, and it seems to be indicated you thought of hobbyists basically doing 1 or 2 bedrooms every now and then.
Right.
That is not a business.
That's right. It's not a business. And that's why I believe we haven't had any...
So we don't have a bed and breakfast. A
But-
bed and
but
breakfast
that's-
is a business.
But that's, well, we don't have it identified in the zoning ordinance as a business, but I believe that's why we haven't had any legal applications for a B&B, because everyone recognizes that it's not,
And I
it
think-
was intended to provide...
I'm just taken aback by this whole
Yeah.
discussion surrounding a hobby. This is not a business. Then it shouldn't be on the table.
I
If we
think
want
we're
a
trying to
business, we want a
decide
business.
what should be done about
Then this
this
issue
regulation.
about parking on the street versus not parking on the street is public. If someone wants to park in it, I don't care who is accustomed to using their parking spot. It belongs to the public. So I'm a bit taken aback by the turn of the discussion.
Well, provided that the street isn't designated as
Restricted.
a district for residents with their proper sticker to park there.
Yeah, which
Then
is,
these interlopers, shall we say, visitors, whatever you want to call them, could conceivably be taking spots on the street that have been relegated to residents.
I'm
If
going,
that's not the case, and it's the street's presently open for public parking, then I would say, okay.
anybody can park there, right. I would suggest that you ask Mary Singh to come to the microphone. She served on the Citizens Committee drafting the 1993 zoning ordinance and is familiar with the discussion on Bs and Bs, if that would be
It was
helpful.
1993. A few years have elapsed.
I think the question is, what should we do? But Mary is interested, and she is here, so she may have some opinions about what we should do. I think you've been drafted.
Yeah, you know, that was going to be one of my questions, Mr. Chairman. What's our mission here tonight?
I think our mission is to look at the policy questions and have some ideas of what we think should happen. And I know that the law department is terrific at drafting. and it takes a smaller committee will be more efficient for the drafting part. And we may have questions for their representative too. Mary?
I'm Mary Singh. I live in the 1700 block of Hinman. In answer to your question, it is a long time, since 1993. You're absolutely right about that. But at the time, and you mentioned the word hobby, what we talked about in the committee then was the fact that there were so many people living in houses in Evanston, and we kept hearing, oh, people can't stay in Evanston because our taxes are too high. So we thought that if they could use part of their home as a bed and breakfast, it would enable people to stay. But the idea wasn't, because nobody thought of it, that a corporation or anybody else, even a single individual or a couple, would come in and buy the house for the purpose of a bed and breakfast. The purpose was supposed to be to help the people who'd been there for a number of years to pay their taxes, to live well, by using some of their bedrooms as a bed and breakfast. And I thought that was a very reasonable thing. You don't want people who've lived in Evanston for 10, 15 years to have to leave because they can't pay their taxes. If, you know, their kids have gone to college, they've got a couple of extra bedrooms, why not let them be able to rent them out? And that was what we had intended. But, you know, nobody thought that somebody would come in and buy for only that purpose. So I think your idea of the distance is a very good one. In my particular block, the 1700 block of Hinman and therefore the 1700 block of Judson and some of Clark Street, there are a number of houses who, if somebody wanted to sell them, could obviously sell them for more money to a business, to be used as a business, than as a single family home. And if those three houses that could accommodate a great number of bedrooms, or have a great number of bedrooms, were able to do what is being done at 300 Church Street, it would make our neighborhood would change completely. And that's why I hope you can get this written in such a way that, and maybe you can't do this, I don't know what's legal, but I thought that you could have, if somebody wanted a bed and breakfast, they should have lived in the house, not just in Evanston, but in the house for X number of years. I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know if that's a possibility, but they care then about their neighbors, because they've made people near them their neighbors. They're part of the community. This other thing doesn't work out for me, but at least the distance would help an awful lot on our block.
Yeah, Ms. Singer, thanks for the comment. The last time this issue came up, the issue of the intent of what was actually put down in 93 came up. And since I wasn't there, and I think a lot of people here weren't there, that became a bit questionable as to what you guys actually intended. And thank you for shedding the light on that. I made the assumption on that day that what you said is what the intent was. Also, I'd like to go back to something that came up not long ago about if it's a family that is leasing 2 bedrooms as a bed and breakfast, it's not a business, it's business. Money is changing hands.
Yeah.
It's just a different amount as to somebody who's actually leasing all 5 bedroom or 10 bedrooms. So money is changing hands, so it's business. The question is, how do we preserve the integrity of the neighborhood? And if a company comes in and does it, it affects the community.
Yes, and of course, it's not just the east side of town. There are homes that where the situation I described where the kids have gone away to college or the kids are out of the house completely. There are lots of houses that have at least 3 bedrooms in them. If the husband and wife are in one, they could rent out 2. And if there's no distance between them, there could be a great many bed and breakfasts in Evanston. There's no limit the way this ordinance is presently written. We had no idea that was the case because we figured if people couldn't, we just never figured that there'd be that many people who couldn't pay their taxes that it would need this. Because you see, if you live in the place and you invite people in, you're going to be really careful who you invite into your house. You're going to, you want people who, like David, that you'd like to have in your home. You're going to be very careful about it. Whereas if you've got a business, a hotel, you're not going to be that careful about it because you're not going to interact with them in the same way that you would if you own the home. That's what we figured. But thank you very much for caring.
I think Mary and I are the only ones here that were present in '93.
Well, but David used to come to various meetings, though. I mean, he wasn't on the committee, but he was definitely in the area.
Maybe you too. And we didn't go over all these details because we didn't think about it.
No, the idea of a
just looked
corporation buying a house, if that had come up, something would have been written into it, I hope, to protect it.
Now, I see Seth has some comments or questions.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comments. I agree. I don't think a business or corporation should be allowed to come in and buy a house. I agree with your comments that somebody should live there, be living in a home, and we should probably have some type of years that they've lived in that home. I do agree that these can change the feel of the neighborhood if they do turn in, if you have too many B&Bs, and we've all traveled and stayed in them. There are certain parts of certain towns that are designated for B&Bs, and they're like little hotels, and there aren't any families on the blocks anymore, and obviously we don't want that to happen. But I do think, on one hand, I support that, you can't have more than one of these leasing 2 bedrooms out for a block and a half. But if the intent is to help owners of homes stay in those homes, then by restricting you can't have one of these facilities or homes that rent out 2 bedrooms for every block and a half, then there have the potential that a lot of families will not be able to do this.
That's true.
Okay, so I have a concern that if we are going to pass this ordinance and say it's restricted to families who have lived in the home for X number of years, and you can't rent more than 2 bedrooms, so it's not an industry, it is actually families leasing bedrooms. I have a concern that if you restrict it to only 1 home or 2 for every 3 blocks, that in certain neighborhoods, if the goal is to help families stay in the homes or people keep their homes, then there may be a significant number of people that would like to do it that will be restricted from doing it because there's already one a block away, and they're a block and they're on the next block. It's a block away, but it's still within. So I think that's an issue that we should talk about. I don't think it's fair, actually.
I agree.
To long-term residents. I'm strongly against allowing corporations to come in and buying some of the beautiful homes in Evanston and turning them into hotels all over Evanston. If we make a district that is for that, that's another issue, but I think that's got to be really well planned out. Those are my comments. And thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you. Another thing, there are places, and I don't know if you found this, David, or the rest of you who've stayed in bed and breakfast. I'm sure we all have, someplace or other. Sometimes they several houses next to each other, so that they can be run in conjunction. But they're one business, and I don't think that's what we want. We don't want 3 homes together being run as one business. I mean, we want.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me
as
make
long as
some,
it were written so that didn't happen.
Let me make some comments. I think probably it would be a good idea to consider more than one class of B&B, depending on where they're located. So we would have in the single-family areas a set of regulations, and in the commercial areas, and we have houses in commercial areas, a different set of regulations. I think the impact, a small part of the impact comes from the number of people there. A large part of the impact comes from signs, the exterior, how parking is handled, how many people are hanging around, and that it would make some sense to try and craft a set of regulations so that in the residential areas, such as your neighborhoods, they're pretty innocuous and they look like the other houses. The places I've been where there's a collection of B&Bs that impact the neighborhood, they have sort of garish signs and sometimes different levels of maintenance and sometimes a whole bunch of cars where there normally wouldn't be some. They look different, and if there's too many, the neighborhood feels different. I've been in other places where there are, and parts of Saugatuck in the residential areas away from the downtown come to mind, where there are numerous bed and breakfasts, and you would never know. So I think the exterior makes a big difference. I'm concerned. 900 feet seems a lot to me in terms of impact. A block makes more sense to me, or the number of feet equivalent to a block.
Excuse me, but would Scott, if somebody starts a bed and breakfast, if it only goes with those owners, sooner or later, the owners that I was imagining, and truly it was just our imagination, are they going to either sell or die off, and then there's room for one other bed and breakfast in that block?
I don't think we can tie a special use to a special person.
That's right.
Oh, you can't?
The Corporation Council may disagree with me, but I think it's a difficult problem legally.
We did at 300 Church. We tied it to a
Yeah,
special person.
and I don't think anybody's going to sue you about it, frankly. Certainly not the people who received or I don't know if it's granted, the special use is granted, but they're not going to go after you. But I think it's not the best way to regulate and can raise issues. I'm more comfortable with tying ownership to who's living there, so that the majority owners, and I think we can write an ordinance that covers partnerships and principals and partnerships and corporations and LLCs.
Would that mean then that these people who live there and want to rent out a couple of rooms, if they leave, they could sell that to somebody else who comes in from the outside and hasn't lived in that home?
I think so, just like we would do with a single family now. I mean, you never know who will be your neighbor tomorrow.
Yes, that's true.
So, but I think we need to really be careful about exterior impacts that we can talk about.
Is that something that you feel comfortable referring to the law department?
Absolutely. They're the experts, and someone pays them for it.
I'm Lynn Iramo. I live at 414 Church Street, right down I'm one of the eligible neighbors. I think we're backtracking because we've already let a corporation come in to buy 300 Church to turn it into a B&B. So everybody's saying that shouldn't be allowed, but it's already been approved. So I'd like to know, what we're talking about.
Going forward, and new ones, possibility of new ones.
Is the primary owner of 300 Church going to be running the B&B or the house or whatever we're calling it?
I think not, and that's what got the alderman's attention.
Okay, thank you.
Let me ask Ken of the Law Department if he wants to participate and give us information relevant to the issues that have been raised.
There have been many issues raised. Is there any one in particular you'd like me to begin with?
Well, at the end of the last meeting, there was, we struggled unsuccessfully, in my opinion. Maybe others disagree. But we struggled unsuccessfully with the question of any ownership restriction and whether it could be done and whether it was constitutional and so on and so forth. So I thought maybe you had looked at it.
I don't have a definitive answer for that, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that a great deal of the law in this area is unsettled, particularly in light of recent Supreme Court rulings and presidential candidates' comments to that effect. Essentially, let me refer you actually to what we already have on the books, which is the definition of owner in 618.3. Owner is defined as any full or part owner, joint owner, tenant in common, tenant in partnership, joint tenant or tenant by the entirety with legal or beneficial title to the whole or to part of a structure or land. Obviously, that's a very broad definition, but it's intentionally so, given the fact that owner is used ubiquitously across the entire zoning ordinance. So in order to be multifunctional or useful across the course of the ordinance, it will be written broadly. Excuse me. I understand the public's concerns regarding ownership of a B&B, or actually other uses or structures also, by a fictional person, in this case a corporation, an LLC. However, one of my concerns in redrafting a definition of owner is that the permutations in which an owner can exist are just many, many, many. We have proper corporation. We have limited liability corporation. Or limited liability company? Another one that actually sprang to my mind that hasn't been raised as of yet is what if a property is held in trust? Parents who have raised children could put their home into a trust to be for the benefit of the entire family, still live there, might have lived there for decades, but essentially one could argue that they might not meet a more restrictive definition of owner, even though they might be someone to whom we would consider within the scope of contemplation in 1993, the definition of B&B. And that's just one example that came to me during tonight's discussions. So the issue of whether, and also I would point out that at least not that I've found and not that I'm aware of, in no other part of the ordinance do we make a distinction between types of owners. Essentially, you could actually argue that in the case of B&Bs, we already have made something of a distinction there, where we say in 647G, which is the licensing portion of the B&B ordinance, says that the resident owner shall obtain a license. The point being there that it's implicit in the term, but the owner has to live on site in the structure. So one can make the argument that it's already been restricted to some extent, whereas we have other situations where we have uses where the owner might indeed be a corporation in the case of a commercial property and never step foot inside the building.
Do you believe that provision prevents corporations from owning B&Bs? Because they certainly can't be resident in the normal sense of the term.
No, but
it's applied to natural persons.
But again, given that let me go back to the definition. Any person with legal or beneficial title to whole or part of the structure or land. So in that case, that's how a stockholder in a corporation or a beneficiary of a trust could potentially inhabit the property without having a majority or complete ownership of the property.
So an owner could own 2% of the corporation and qualify and not have controlling interest over what happens with the property. So
that's correct.
Given that, could we stipulate that the owner, as we define it here, must have controlling ownership? What was the differentiation you made?
Well, you can have
controlling interest, controlling ownership,
more
than 50%. In other words, that person would be the authority that the city could go to make something happen.
I'm not prepared to to offer a verbal opinion right now on that particular issue. But I'll do some more research and get
Stuart?
back.
I would remind the members of the commission that this is a special use, and the council has a lot of discretion as to whether or not to permit a particular application for a bed and breakfast, and it covers a lot of ground. This is a huge question and a huge issue, and I think we should form a subcommittee of this committee to come up with something, because there are all kinds of particulars. A corporation is one of them. I mean, that's just one of the little issues. Distance is another one. Parking is another one. But I think we ought to tackle all of these things, but it's not something we can even begin to touch tonight, in my view. And I think a subcommittee should be formed to come up with some proposal in conjunction with Alderman Fisk and Alderman Wynn to work something out, and then present it to this committee, and then go on to the Plan Commission.
I don't know if I would agree. It seems to me that we've raised a number of concerns that it seems to me that staff should be able to. I might be wrong. I don't know if you were just shaking your head yes or no there, but perhaps come back with some recommendations and and maybe a document with some recommendations based on, some of our comments here, because I don't think we can really come up with anything that's legal and binding, and it's going to have to go back to staff and to legal anyways. Could we get your comment on that?
I would say that staff can provide information, but as far as policy recommendations, those do come from the Plan Commission to the P&D Committee to Council for final adoption.
What I'm saying is, I think we've made a lot of comments regarding policy, and I think those type of things we should be able to do without going into a subcommittee. But
there's a lot of policy issues that are at issue. A lot of policy issues, and those are the things that I would suggest we submit to a subcommittee.
Okay.
Well, I guess
I would support that, because I don't think we have an examination of the transcript won't reveal a coherent set of policy recommendations.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't mean to.
Actually, I had a question. Let me go back to a question that I had for Chairman Peters. If, for the case of, let's say, if we take Hammond Street, right, and we attach a license to operate a bed and breakfast to a home, and if the person sells, from what I gathered from your earlier comment is that that license actually stays with the building. Is that true?
Yes. I think that it can't be tied to the person.
Okay.
I have seen precedent. The book I used, the case book to teach land use law,
That's another one.
includes such cases. There are cases going the other way, but I think it's a bad policy to tie it to a person. I think it's it can be abused. But the other standards would stay. So a new owner would have to comply with the special use standards in the ordinance and any added as part of the special use grant.
Okay. Well, since from what we've heard from those who were there, the intent was to basically help people who have lived in the community for a while. If I am the person who purchased the recently vacant bed and breakfast on Hinman, and if there is somebody next door who's also been waiting to actually have a bed and breakfast, that person doesn't have a shot if I buy it. And it defeats the whole purpose of what it was set up for.
That is true. And some people have raised the question of whether cumulative impact and distance requirements are constitutional. I think they've been upheld, but if you have a distance requirement, it's hard on the people nearby once something's granted. I think they're most common for billboards and signs. And in that context have been upheld. Group homes, I think, have been upheld. I don't know what would happen with bed and breakfast, but I assume a reasonable distance requirement would be upheld. And it's a way of avoiding cumulative impact. But once someone has it, you know, it looks pretty unfair for the neighbors, I agree. I don't know how else to deal with cumulative impact, but.
Let me ask another question. The idea of subcommittee, I think even on this panel, there seems to be differences on what constitutes a bed and breakfast. So if you have a subcommittee, how do you get everybody's view on there? Because
well, maybe not a subcommittee, but I think at this level, you know, there are a lot of issues that have to be tackled and examined very carefully, and it's going to take a lot of time. And maybe the zoning committee is situated to handle that. I don't know. It's up to you guys.
On a different subject, how does this impact families that lease a room to like a graduate student or a Northwestern student? Is that now considered a bed and breakfast, or what is that considered? You know, so there are
it's a rooming house.
Well, it's not a rooming house because there are plenty of families that will you know, I've known growing up. I don't know any now, but I grew up here. That rented a room to a Northwestern student, you know, and that to me falls outside of this. But on the other hand, if you're renting a room, we have now an ordinance that says you can't do it for more than 4 weeks in your own home. And how does that impact that situation? I don't know if it's a different problem unless those are excluded from this. So are we going to write an ordinance that says it's okay for you to lease a bedroom, rent a bedroom out, have a roommate, or whatever? You know?
I think at least, and I have some personal experience with this, when we bought our first house, we were students, and my husband was in law school, and I was working part-time, and we obviously were looking for income, so we had 2 graduate students living in our house, as most of our neighbors did. And that was allowed under the zoning ordinance to rent out rooms to 2 unrelated paying guests. And I don't know whether the ordinance still allows that.
How is that handled now?
This has also been the subject of much discussion of late. The zoning ordinance, as it reads now, permits in one dwelling unit not more than 3 unrelated persons. So you could have a family potentially of, you know, a very large family, say like 10 people, and they could have as many as 2 other persons living within their dwelling unit who are unrelated to them.
But in the ordinance, are they allowed to pay for that?
Yes.
Okay.
The B&B the definition of a B&B in 618.3 is an owner-occupied single-family or 2-family dwelling where short-term lodging and morning meals are provided for compensation. So if you have a situation where, say it's not a single-family or 2-family dwelling, say it's a condominium or apartment situation, and they aren't providing meals, and they're intending to have a long-term tenant rather than a short-term guest, that would fall outside of the B&B definition. So it wouldn't be subject to the regulations you're discussing now.
So the answer is don't feed them breakfast.
Well, and also have them stay for long-term and numbers and the like.
Seems vague.
Let me ask, are there any members that would be willing to devote time to this issue in probably between now and mid-February? I see 2 hands.
I'll put in time, but
okay, I think maybe a subcommittee is a way to flesh out what are the issues, are there potential solutions, and with a small group you can work with both staff and the alderman and come back with the pieces and the questions defined and maybe answers. Is there a motion to
I would move to form a subcommittee, and I would be happy to serve on it, for the purpose of examining the entire issue of bed and breakfasts and the ordinances pertaining thereto.
Is there a second? Second. Is there discussion?
Yeah, I have a quick question here. I think what we've been trying to do is actually come up with a definition of what constitutes a bed and breakfast in Evanston, right? The exploration of all the, what do you call it, the various definition of bed and breakfast. I think I like the compromise that you came up with, being in commercial area. You make what do you call this, different allowances for all, and you make a different allowances for residential area also. But I think the task ahead is not a, I get the policy part, but I think it's about defining a new definition, coming up with a new definition of bed and breakfast that fits the intent. I think that's where we're going to, and I don't think this has to be any prolonged, elaborate exercise. I think I'm looking at this sheet here, and I see where pretty much where Alderman Fisk and the city would like to go. So the question is, how do we take this and craft something that doesn't prejudice anybody, but still make sure that we don't have a lot of these things popping up all over the place?
A lot of what? I'm sorry, I didn't
A lot
hear.
of these things.
These things, these bread and breakfasts is popping up all over the place.
I think you are correct. The definition and how we would want to define it is the key question, one of the key questions. I don't think we're stuck with the definition from the 90s, but what would be good for Evanston? I mean, there's going to be trade-offs, protecting the neighborhood, providing opportunities for owners, providing opportunities for people who want to stay there, and I don't know how they end up, but.
But put another way, we're going to, at least this is how I see it, revisit the entire question of bed and breakfasts.
I mean, I think you might end up with bed and breakfast and something a little more intense that may be a second class of bed and breakfast, or maybe boutique hotel in the commercial areas. But I leave that to people who are working on it. I don't know how you'll solve the problem. But I think it'll be easier to do with a smaller number of people. Any further discussion?
And what we might do is come back to this committee with a statement of our mission, the parameters of our mission, and get your thoughts on that subject. And once we have the green light on that, then we will convene as a subcommittee and explore those and try to accomplish that mission.
Any other discussion?
Could I say one thing?
Yeah.
One of the concerns that Alderman Nguyen and I had was that we try to move this along as expeditiously as possible to council, so that there wasn't another application that would come in and squeak through the crack in the door.
I think I only chose February because we have holidays in the
Right.
middle.
Right.
But I suggested as a target. You think it needs to be sooner?
Well, I would prefer that it continue on as quickly. At the last meeting, you asked us to come back with wording, and I think we've come back with pretty concise, wording of at least of the direction that we would like to go. And I'm very respectful of your positions and your special knowledge and expertise in this area. And I think we are in agreement. I think the two-tiered definition is probably what we had already identified as a B&B and a new category of a guest hotel. And so I think we're kind of all in the same, going down the same thought process here. I'm just concerned that we not make this more complicated than we need to.
I see a light somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, since we seem to be getting closer as to what we're looking for, one being a guest hotel and the other one a bed and breakfast, then shouldn't we then basically craft a definition for, we take what you guys have put together here, and then we basically build upon it At least we come back with two things. So I think we can actually do that over here as a caucus, and basically say, okay, this is what constitutes a guest hotel or a boutique hotel, and this is what the '93 intent, which is still the 2011 intent, is for a bed and breakfast. Huh?
Is it the 2011 intent as well?
Well, actually, when I've stayed in several bed and breakfasts, and I've yet to stay in one that basically my definition of bed and breakfast fits what you guys decided in '93. That's my understanding of it.
I don't think it's so simple, because I think the regulation of the exterior is the key to saving neighborhoods and reducing impact. And
Yeah, with respect, I would disagree with you. I think most people who are going to open Bs are, especially, in the neighborhoods in Evanston, would be a lot of which are historic districts. There would be a lot of oversight on what the exterior looked like. My main concern, and I think that of Alderman Nguyen, is when you have a commercial use in the middle of a single-family neighborhood, it's less likely that people are going to say, I really want to live next to a B&B. I mean, most people who move into neighborhoods say, I'd love to live next to a family or a couple or whoever. I'd like to have that neighborhood and personal experience. And so that's what we see, I think, is the difficulty here, is that you don't have that same interaction with a commercial entity as you do with actual residents.
I don't disagree, but I think if we want attention given to the exterior, it should be in the ordinance, not out in the ether. And I just think it'll take a little time to figure out what that means.
Can I clarify one thing? Since the passage of the ordinance in 1993, we've not had one single family. Do you see going forward the same need that you thought you needed in 1993, based on 17 years of nobody coming forward?
I'm sorry, I guess I don't understand the question.
Well, you crafted the ordinance in 1990, or well,
someone did.
Yeah,
Yes.
in 1993, because you saw a need. But in 17 years, no one's come forward and said, I have that need. Do you see this?
No one has legally come forward, but people have run Bs.
We know of
There've been,
three.
yeah,
Okay, so,
there've been illegal Bs in Evanston.
so we want to draw them into the family of legitimacy.
It would be lovely to draw everyone into the family of legitimacy.
Satisfied.
Your light's on. Does that mean you have a question?
Well, I'm willing to work on B&Bs, but
I'm willing to work on B&Bs, but I'm not so sure I want to move into the category of whatever the hotel is that we're talking about. It seems to me it's either it's a B&B in a residential zone or it's a B&B in a commercial zone, but it's still a B&B.
I think that's one of the questions for the committee.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Has there been a second? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's been a second. Okay.
Aye.
I'm sorry. Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion passes. I suggest that after we finish, the people who wish to do this figure out a time and then proceed.
And could you also make sure that Alderman Nguyen and I are invited to attend?
Yes.
Great.
I think it is hoped that you will attend, and I know you've got many meetings to attend, but we need you and we need Alderman Nguyen to participate in this.
Right.
We have one other matter that's not on the agenda. Several meetings ago, I asked if anyone was willing to chair this meeting, this committee, and Richard has told me he would be willing to do that.
Excellent.
And therefore, I nominate him as chair. Richard, sure.
A second? If it needs a second, otherwise, I think it's great.
It's happening too quick here. There's too many grins.
Everyone is thrilled.
Okay.
a comment?
Does that mean I don't get to drive you anymore? Or does that mean I have to drive
Now
you?
you have to drive it.
Well, all in favor? Do we all vote here?
If there's discussion, we can do that, and then we vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Enthusiastic aye.
I vote aye, it passes.
Yay.
Come sit here.
No, you can adjourn us now.
Ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Are you sitting on this?